November 16, 1776 AD, the Battle of Fort Washington. The Battle of Fort Washington took place on November 16, 1776 AD. A large combined army of Hessian and British soldiers easily defeated the 3,000 defenders of the fort. The fort was constructed on the orders of General George Washington in the early summer of 1776. He felt a well-constructed and defended fortress located on the highest point of Manhattan Island could protect the Hudson River from a potential British invasion. In August of 1776, General Howe invaded Long Island and launched an attack on Manhattan Island on September 15 with over 4,000 British and Hessian soldiers, easily defeating General Washington's 500 defenders at the Battle of Kip's Bay. The next day, however, Washington was able to rally his soldiers after retreating and defeated the British invaders at the Battle of Harlem Heights. After his push inward in Manhattan was stopped by Washington, Howe decided to move his soldiers south to Westchester County to try and cut off Washington's troops, who retreated north to White Plains. During his retreat north, Washington left 1,200 soldiers to defend Fort Washington that was under the command of Colonel Robert Magaw. Meanwhile, General Howe left Lord Percy to defend the Harlem Heights and watch Fort Washington and monitor its activity. On October 27th, the British began to slowly creep their way up to Fort Washington by sending 2 frigates up the Hudson River to try and bombard the fort, but due to its location, were unable to raise their cannons high enough and were damaged by the fort's battery along with another battery from Fort Lee, which was across the river. For the next couple of weeks, the British would send small companies of soldiers to snoop around the fort, but they were always beaten back by the defenders. Colonel Magaw felt that his soldiers could defend the fort until late fall or early winter. They could have if his assistant didn't desert, who gave the British Army the schematics of Fort Washington. Lord Percy received the plans from the turncoat and passed them on to Howe, who just defeated Washington in battle and was planning on knocking out the fort. Fort Washington now had 3,000 soldiers inside preparing to defend it, but didn't know about the British Army having its blueprints. General Howe planned on attacking Fort Washington from 3 sides. Percy and his men would attack from the south, Lord Cornwallis would attack from the east, and Hessian commander Wilhelm von Kniphausen would attack from the north. On November 15th, Howe sent a messenger under the flag of truce to the fort with a letter of surrender addressed to Colonel Magaw, stating that if the defenders choose not to surrender, then they will die along with the fort. Magaw replied, "We will fight to the last extremity." The battle lasted several hours, which began on November 16th at 7 a.m. in the morning. The overconfident soldiers guarded the fort were eventually overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the invading British and Hessian soldiers. At one point, the American defenders' rifles jammed due to overfiring and had to use their defensive boulders as weapons and roll them down the hillside to crush the Hessians. But the Americans eventually surrendered, despite vowing to fight until the end. The battle was notable for the first American woman to fight in combat. Her name was Maggie Corbin, who was fighting by her husband's side. She joined him as a nurse. Her husband John was an artilleryman, and he was killed during the battle. She learned how to work the cannon by watching her husband and took his spot when he went down. Maggie fired the cannon until she was severely wounded and was later captured by the Hessians and British after the Americans surrendered. The defenders lost 59 soldiers, 96 wounded, and over 2,800 were taken prisoner, while the British and Hessians suffered 84 killed and 374 were wounded. The Americans that surrendered were humiliated and brutalized by their captors. They took all of their ammunition, supplies, and 36 cannons. The 2,800 soldiers that surrendered probably wished they had fought to the death, as they were sent to a prison ship, and after 18 months, only 800 would survive.